how many of you have ever been to a teach-in before? Okay, not too many. This is kind of an old-timey concept. I just want to read to you a definition of teach-in that I found. An extended meeting usually held on a college campus for lectures, debates, and discussions. And I'd like to emphasize the discussion part this evening, to raise awareness of or express a position on a social or political issue. Clearly the issues of the high-profile incidents of what happened in Ferguson and New York City, and numerous other cases of high-profile events in which African Americans were killed in encounters with law enforcement officials has garnered a tremendous amount of attention and a tremendous amount, really, of wonder and outrage on the part of many people about how these kinds of things could happen, particularly when there's video and there's so many things that seem inexplicable about these events. And I would just say that this academic year, the Walker Institute has gotten into kind of an extended discussion of criminal justice issues. For me as director, and I've been here since 2008, this is a relatively new and unfamiliar field to me. I've spent most of my career working on issues of education and health disparities, as well as economic disparities. And they get, in general, to say it more generally, I've been involved in issues of social justice as they relate to race, ethnicity, and class. And speaking about these kinds of issues, I guess I have gotten something of an education in talking to people in the community, talking to my colleagues who have far more experience with the issues of criminal justice than I do, of learning about the seriousness and the consequences of these issues and how important they are, and really how deeply they affect, on a very visceral level, so many of us in our society. So, that said, that's what our conversation is going to be about tonight. Is Diana Sachs here? Diana is from the library, works in the library, and she prepared for all of us a guide, an information resource guide, which is tremendously, she did an unbelievably good job. Let me just put it that way. There's press reports, there's statistics, there's information about centers that study issues of equity with regards to law enforcement and the criminal justice system. It is a tremendous resource. It's listed, where is it? Somewhere on one of the pages in your program, and the web address is libguides.wmich.edu/Ferguson. So you don't need to memorize that. It's somewhere in your program.
Of the agenda.
Okay, thank you. In the bottom of the agenda for more information, right above the big W. That is great. And also, Dr. Doug Davidson on our panel created a fact sheet, which is also included for your information. So without further ado, I want to turn over the discussion here to our expert panelists. We're going to start out in a plenary discussion and go for until about 6:30 or so. We'll see how the discussion goes. Maybe we'll be a little bit flexible, but we'll stick more or less in that range. And then we will move to breakout rooms. You see there's a list of 5 different breakout rooms that are headed by different faculty here from our panel and elsewhere. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. Starting in the far left, Dr. Ron Kramer, who's the head of the Criminal Justice Program in the Sociology Department. Dr. Lou Walker, after whom this institute is named, and the Emeritus Chair of the Sociology Department. Dr. Doug Davidson, professor in the sociology department. Mo Washington. Maurice Washington, thank you.
If you're gonna say Mo, it's M-O-E, okay?
Okay. All right, Maurice, thank you, sir. And Maurice, you are a honors college student, am I right?
Yes.
Okay, and about to graduate?
I taught the African American male section of first year seminar last month.
Okay, excellent. Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety Chief Jeff Hadley has joined us, so thank you for being here, Chief.
Thanks for having me.
And Charles Crawford, also of the Criminal Justice and Sociology Department. So where to begin? I think that, I thought that one place to begin would be to kind of go backwards briefly on the three concepts in our title: police violence, racism, and social justice. And I'm just going to start it out quickly with the social justice issue to say that in many ways, in some ways, there has been a tremendous amount of progress with regards to racial justice since Martin Luther King's heroic efforts in the civil rights movement. On the other hand, it's been very discouraging that some things really have not gotten better. And for starters, I was just looking at, not zeroing in quite yet on the issue of criminal justice, wealth disparities by race. The average wealth of a African American household in the United States in 2013, and by wealth I mean the value of all of one's possessions. If you are a homeowner, if you own a car, your other possessions, etc., bank accounts, investments, whatever you might have, is $11,000. For that of non-Hispanic white Americans, it's $141,900, 13 times greater. And back in 1983, the disparity was still enormous. It was 10 times greater. But today, the disparity is even greater than it was in 1983. So disparities by wealth have gotten worse. Yes, there is a growing African American middle class. There's a growing Hispanic middle class. And by the way, the wealth disparities for Hispanics are almost as large as for African Americans as they are against whites. There's a growing middle class, but there's an awful lot of people who are stuck, who are not making progress economically, who are enmeshed in poverty. The child poverty rate for African American and Latino children in our city of Kalamazoo is approximately 60%. That puts Kalamazoo around the 96th, 97th percentile for child poverty for the entire country for African Americans and Latinos. So that we have a long ways to go to become a more cohesive community, one where everybody has an equal shot. Wealth matters. So many things are associated with wealth and income: education outcomes, health status, access to opportunities, access to good jobs, not having to hassle for all sorts of things to make ends meet in your life. And so these things matter, unfortunately, and there is a tremendous gap that remains that I think is a challenge for all of us to understand the causes of it. Related to this is that there's a tremendous gap with regards to the criminal justice system. In this community and nationwide, African Americans are far more likely to be caught up in the criminal justice system and to be involved in and to become incarcerated. Michigan is one of 8 states in the country where there are more where more is spent by the state on criminal justice and the penal system than on higher education. So do we have our priorities straight, is the question. What can we do on the front end really to address these issues? At the same time, under Chief Hadley's leadership in this community, the chief had the foresight to conduct a study with an outside contractor to see whether there was racial bias in policing with regards to traffic stops. The study found that yes, indeed, there was a significant amount of racial bias in policing. That I should say disparities in pullovers and disparities in other steps in the process, and the chief can describe that a bit in a moment. So we have issues here. The chief will describe this. We have our issues in this community, but there are very serious efforts by the city with Commissioner Cooney and the remainder of the Kalamazoo City Commission to really make policing and services for this community to be equitable. A theme of our Walker Institute is one community, that we need to become one community. What are the gaps that exist? What are the causes of those gaps, and how can we close them? With regards to the criminal justice issues and with policing, that is the particular issue we're zeroing in on this evening. So I think with all of that said, I'd like to pass it to Dr. Walker and Dr. Davidson in particular, who I think may start out with some historical perspective, and you can take it from there. And please let us know if you have trouble hearing. Okay. Yep. Yep.
I'm told we can't, can you hear me in the back? Good. So I won't be long. I had thought I would talk for about 30, 40 minutes and a half hour. At least, you know, as a former professor, before I retired, I love the classroom situation. But anyway, I'd like to also thank you for coming. My colleague, Dr. Cooney here, Mr. Ken Howard, our former city manager. Please, Ken, will you at least be acknowledged? And all the other distinguished colleagues, I'd like to say welcome and thank you, and also thank Dr. Reddy as the director of the Walker Institute. We are doing great works here. We're trying to, at least. But I want to not take much time, but because this is the time we celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. King, I'd like to say that much of what is being played out today played out during his lifetime. Dr. King was one who was a rebel. He broke many laws. He was jailed. I'm a contemporary of Dr. King. I'm also a son of the South. Some of you might have seen Selma, Alabama. The march, Selma, that was my hometown. The Pettus Bridge I crossed, I can't count the times, but many, many thousands of times, Pettus Bridge there. But what I want to talk about is that this context is not a new context. It really isn't. King wanted us to build a society that was multi-racial, multi-ethnic, one that was free of racism. He shared that with us in his dream that was rooted in the American dream. Dream where one would be judged on what? Character, not one's skin color. I was fortunate to march with Dr. King on his last major march through Mississippi, a march against fear. Wish I had some time to talk about some of this, but just want to say that it's this context that you will and I will talk about tonight is not a new context. It's also a context where people lay their lives on the line for justice and for freedom, as Dr. King did. As Dr. King did. But what comes to my mind tonight is his last speech, major speech in Memphis, where he talked about longevity. You love to live a long life. And longevity has its place. He said, but I'm not afraid of any man, because I've gone to the mountaintop and I've seen the promised land. You admonished us to say, don't think of all the awards bestowed upon me that had gotten the grand prize, Nobel Peace Prize. But what he wanted us to understand, or remember him as, he was a drum major for justice, peace, and righteousness. This context, in my mind at least, shared many of the experiences of those who born in the South. The King would want us tonight to at least stress some of the issues involving our criminal justice system. One comes to mind, and I jotted it down. Why is it perfectly legal to discriminate a person convicted of a crime in employment, in housing, voting, educational opportunities, and public assistance? Wish you would talk about that tonight and the awful consequences that one experiences who has been convicted of a crime. Another question I hope that we at least touch on in the teach-in is the criminal justice and the so-called war on drugs responsible for the creation of a new Jim Crow, environment that has awful and disastrous consequences for African Americans? Why are the policies and practices governing racial profiling, what are they in this country? And how damaging are those for people of color? Dr. Reddy mentioned something, our chief will talk a little bit about that, I hope. And why is it that the incarceration rate in this country is the highest of any industrialized nation? And finally, and this is crucial, what, if any, meaningful changes are occurring in our country regarding police-community relations? King said he wanted a different society, and that it would be a long struggle, that the arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. Thank you.
Give a sermon. Preach, teach, as they said in the old school. Yes.
My first caller.
Huh?
That was my first caller.
That will be my last, but anyway. I was asked to kind of talk a bit about the sort of historical relationship in part between black community and policing that obviously also connects with issues of black racism. Like Lou, I am a child of the South. He's an Alabama boy. I grew up in Mississippi in part. And I'm somewhat slightly younger than he and Dr. King, but we would probably all be considered in somewhat the same generation and stuff. And so we share a lot of the same experiences and stuff. And so one of the things that I wanted to try to emphasize here that, I want to sort of ask people if they've sort of seen one, I think he mentioned the movie Selma, which I think is an important film to see. There's an older film, I think, that is equally powerful that I think people should see, and the name of that film is Mississippi Burning. It focuses on the FBI's effort to deal with the murder and the cover-up associated with Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney, who were 3 civil rights workers working on voting rights campaign in Mississippi. The other thing that I would recommend people to see, if at all possible to understand this, and especially given the stir that is emerging around the film Selma, is that you need to watch the Eyes on the Prize documentary. There's a section that deals with, the Selma and crossing that bridge and the violence that occurred at that particular moment. I think it's important for people to see that because the documentary is taken in real time. I mean, that's speaking to what happened at the moment that that particular incident went down, and people were beaten, and some of them beaten senselessly, including men, women, and children, okay, by police officers, okay? And that, I think, speaks to, like, the history of the South, all right? As a young child growing up in Mississippi, my parents, my grandparents, my extended family, whole neighborhood, everybody talked about whatever happens, do all that you can to never have to really encounter the police. In Mississippi, we were not raised to see the police as people who were there to serve and to protect black people. We were raised to see the police as practically almost like an occupied army. And that one of the most dangerous things that could happen to you was for you to be arrested. Because if you ever got arrested, we didn't know how you were going to come back or if you would come back. That is, that people were beaten when they were put in jail, some people beaten to the point where they will never be the same again. And sometimes people just sort of disappeared in prison. You know, we didn't never hear about them anymore. So one incident I remember as a child growing up is that we heard a dog barking outside, sort of late evening, go outside to try to see what's happening. So we see a police car parked across the road and the lights on. Dog still barking. After a while, we see the police car pull away. Go back inside, dog still barking. We go back outside. There's a young man, known in the community. We were rural, so people sort of knew each other. I'm really a child not only of the South, but the rural South. And so this young man had managed somehow or other to crawl across a highway with his neck sliced, bleeding. So he's out in sort of the front yard driveway, and he's still bleeding. And so, of course, my family run me back inside. But the police car pulled away and left, all right? So there's a dramatic lesson to me. You know? Here's a man who's obviously been in some kind of fight, either with another black person or with the police. We don't know. We later probably find out that I think it was with another black person. But given the cry that many blacks contemporarily are raising about black bodies and black lives count, this indicated to me that in some very graphic ways that maybe black lives didn't count. That if the police could drop you off, not take you to a doctor, not talk about getting anything done to, like, you know, try to keep you from dying from this cut in your throat, then your fear, my fear of the police has just quadrupled pretty much, right? So I don't ever really want to have any contact with the police because I can see, to me, my life is not important to them. And the life of a lot of people that are around me, they're not important. That, well, I think there have been people in the black community who call for, you know, police protection and police services and stuff. It is always done with a kind of level of ambivalence, with a level of uncertainty, because we don't ever know what the outcome is going to be. Is it going to be one where we get something that we can consider to be justice? Or is it going to be something that is going to escalate into some kind of confrontation and somebody is going to be hurt, all right? And so during the civil rights movement, as we were dealing with what Tim is talking about in terms of teach-ins, and I want to veer a little bit from his definition, teach-ins just didn't happen on college campuses. Teach-ins happened a lot in churches and in people's homes and stuff, as we were trying to organize people and convince them to take the risk, if you will, of confronting potential police violence by, you know, exercising their constitutional right to vote, okay? And so that's sort of like, to me, been the historical context for a lot of things that are happening right now, is that people are remembering, okay, at times in our lives, you know, when we were living under a system that it seems that the rest of the country sort of ignored, that everybody knew injustices were happening, and nobody did anything about it. So I'm reminded when Emmett Till's killers were brought on trial, that is also in that series, Eyes on the Prize, where the judge or the lawyer gets up and tells the white jurors who get in to go out to decide this case, we know that you will do your loyal sons of the South duty, and when you will come back with the correct decision, right? 5 minutes they were out. Right? Here's a black man get up in court and say, there he is. You know, that's the man that took my grandson, and I never saw my grandson again until they fished him out of the bottom of that river with his head crushed and looking like something that I never imagined he could look, okay? Those people took it. They totally dismissed him. In 5 minutes, the jury came back and said, not guilty, okay? And the police officer is sitting there, and he tells everybody sort of like to calm down, keep the colored folks up in the balcony, because that's where we had to sit. And the state representative from the state of Michigan, Charles Diggs, you gotta remember him? Yeah. They had to make a little space for him, see, because he had to get special permission to come into the courtroom in Mississippi and check the police to see if they would protect him while he was there, because he's a northerner, he's an outsider, and there's no guarantee that somebody won't attack him while he's there. You know? And the sheriff told him, oh yeah, we guaranteed, we told that there, you mean that there N-word boy? Come on down, we'll all take care of you while you see what I'm saying? So my attitude, and the attitude I think of many black folk, towards police and confrontations with police, it has not been that good. I mean, we have that history that, you know, it's sort of like read into us. I mean, that was the way I was raised. And so I think part of what we're seeing when people are making these connections is the fact that people are remembering so many times, so many instances over and over again where black bodies have not been taken seriously. Black bodies have been destroyed and killed, and nobody has paid any price, served any time. Sometimes they haven't even come to court. And so that's it for me.
All right, so I have to follow up these two. You know I do.
You do well. You'll be fine.
I guess the point that I want to talk about is from a younger generation perspective. I'm 23 years old. I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois, Inglewood to be exact. And I only came to Kalamazoo because my mom brought me here. She wanted me to have a better life than what my dad and what she had. And so, you know, I didn't know much about racism. I won't lie to you. You know, growing up in Inglewood, there's nothing but people who look like you. This is what we call the hood, right? The hood, the ghetto. And so I didn't know how it felt to be treated, like the way that I was treated, to me that was the norm, you know? When something happened on the block and it takes them an hour to get there, that's the norm for me, you know? When I walk into a store and I get followed around, that's the norm for me. When everyone's sagging their pants and when people get out of prison and you say, oh man, I got respect for him because he went to prison. You know, that's the norm. And so when I came to Kalamazoo, it was a lot different. It was a shock, and I was also in Comstock. Now, that was a big shock, yeah. So I'm around like, Mom, are you sure you want to move here? Like, I mean, at all the places in the world, this is where you want to come. But so it took me a while to get used to it. It did. I won't lie to you, and I'm still getting used to it. I won't lie. But I also started to realize, first of all, it was a little better, but it's a lot different. I started to realize that I'm not on the same level as other people. And I realized that because that norm that I was taught, it wasn't the norm for everyone else. And so, you know, I'm in school, 6th grade, 7th grade. We walk in the stores and I'm getting followed around. They aren't. And I'm like, okay. You know, what's with this norm? And so, you know, it kept happening over and over and over. And I started to realize, okay, you know, I'm not on the same level as these people. And I thought the Kalamazoo was a little better, but it really wasn't because I actually got a jaywalking ticket. And I'll tell you a little story about that. I was, we have these things called EFEs, Education for Employment classes. And these are offered at high schools here in the city. And so during my junior and senior year in high school, I was employed as a barber, at West Michigan College of Barber and Beauty. So on my off time, when I'm not in school and when I'm not there, I would cut hair at the Gospel Mission, because I was also homeless. And when we first moved to Kalamazoo, I lived in the Gospel Mission. And so I always have a special connection with them. So I volunteered my time and I cut hair for these people. It would be lines of them, like full, just like you guys, lines of homeless people waiting for me to cut their hair. And so here I am on a Saturday, volunteering my time. Got my clippers, everything with me. I'm on my way to the Gospel Mission on the north side of Kalamazoo. Next thing you know, I'm just walking down the street, minding my business. 3 police cars pull up, 1 from this way, 2 from this way, K9 unit with them. You gotta have the K9 because I'm African American male, I'm fast, right? So, no, I am fast though, I am fast. But I wasn't gonna run, I don't play with dogs. But I seen the eyes on the prize and those dogs, man. But so they all pull up, 3 of them, and you know, I'm shocked, but I'm keeping my cool. And they're like, where are you going? And I'm like, I'm going to cut hair at the Gospel Mission for free. And they're like, no, you're not. No, you're not. You can't be doing that. I'm like, yes, I really am. And they didn't believe me. They basically just called me a liar, said that I was, you know, selling drugs and all of that. And basically they were following me as well because they, you know, trapped me in so I had nowhere to go. And they gave me the jaywalking ticket. And I made it to Gospel Mission, and I'm like, man, I got a jaywalking ticket. And they wrote me a letter, and I was just gonna let it go, you know, jaywalking ticket, just pay it. But I didn't. From that moment on, you know, I said I'm gonna stand up and I'm gonna do something, because if I continue to do the same thing and let that happen, it's gonna keep happening over and over and over, because they're gonna know that they can continue to get away with this. And so I went to the court and whatever, and I brought the letter from the Gospel Mission, and I fought for my case. And I was ready, man. I was so ready. I went to sleep, like, man, I gotta go to sleep early today, because tomorrow I gotta meet. And I got there, they didn't show up, they never showed up. And so from that point on, you know, I just always taught myself to stand up for what's right. But just speaking from a historical piece, growing up in Chicago, Emmett Till, you know, he came from Chicago, the north to the south. We always heard stories about him all the time. And honestly, I've been afraid to go to the south. You know, I'm considering what I'm going to do after graduation. I'm telling people, you know, I might go out west or I might go out east. They're like, you're not going to go down south? I'm like, no, why would I go down south? I heard the stories, why would I go there? So I've been afraid, and I think, I can't speak for most of my generation, but you know, we have the Great Migration happening again in reverse, and we're moving back and everything. I think that's great. I know people who are going, you know, they want to get into public policy and fight the laws and everything on the East Coast. And I'm like, okay, I'll take the West Coast, you take the East. Parnell, which coast you taking, Parnell?
So what?
Okay. That's our generation, though. But I mean, the reason that I'm here is because I taught an African American male section for the first time in WMU's history since 1903. The first time they ever had an African American male section for first year students. I taught it with Dr. Douglas Davidson. And we had 10 students from, you know, all over, from the basketball team, football team, undecided majors, ROTC, all of that. And we just basically tried to teach them about their history. I don't know if you noticed, but African American males have the lowest retention rate out of all ethnic and gender groups here in the university. And I don't have the precise statistics, I believe it's in the 30s. And the highest is for Euro-American, Anglo-Saxon, Caucasian females. In the 60s, I believe. And I said all 3 because I don't want to offend anyone. Yeah, so that's why I'm here. I love to be a future leader for the younger generation. I believe history is important. I've been studying a lot of it myself. I just recently been watching a lot of Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. documentaries. African Americans, Many Rivers to Cross, and Black and Latin America. And so I think history is very important. I'm here to offer whatever advice I can give and speak for my people. I want to be a future leader for my people. So that's about it.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank Dr. Reedy and Dr. Walker for asking myself to come here along with some of my staff that's here, Assistant Chief Webster, Captain Boyson, and Sergeant Elzinga. And I guess I could stand up here and talk about a lot of...
Chief, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Okay. You know, they call it the teaching. I guess I'm here to be a learning, you know, to sit back and try to absorb, you know, the multitude of perspectives that will come out of the breakout sessions and whatnot. I think there's a lot of perspectives to be shared. There's a lot of conversations to be had. I absolutely agree with Dr. Davidson. History has such an important context for today. There's a long history of bad policing in America that goes back 100 years. I'll wholeheartedly acknowledge that, absolutely. And that has such a significant impact on today's environment. We have to truly appreciate and understand that and learn from it. And this isn't a new thing, like Dr. Walker said. We can go back at some of the major points of civil unrest in America, and in my estimation, there's two common denominators for most of them. There's a police officer and there's a person of color. And that becomes the flashpoint. We can go back maybe every 20 years. But what we haven't done in America is seize that opportunity to be better. The emotions fade and we get on with our lives, and things don't necessarily get that much better for some folks. But I can tell you from the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety, we listen, we're working hard, really hard to do the right thing. That doesn't mean we're perfect, and things happen, no question about it. But I think we've worked really hard to listen. We've worked really hard to engage the community, to understand the context in which we work in, what we need to do to keep the community safe, at the same time recognize people's civil liberties and rights. And so we're working really hard in that effort, and we're real intentional behind that. So without going on and on and on, I feel very fortunate to be here. I think Kalamazoo is fortunate to be able to sit here and have probably 75 people in a very quick time frame that's going to sit down and have reasonable, constructive discussion, and we'll probably won't all agree, but we'll have some rational discourse, and that's important because that's the best way to move forward. So I just want to thank you for being here. We're here to answer your questions honestly and truthfully. So use us as a resource. We'll use you as a resource, and we're going to move forward in the best way possible to make Kalamazoo the best it can be. So I appreciate it.
All right, so I get to go last, and it's hard to follow all of this up, but I want to say a few words, and I'd like to get to the discussion, really the breakout sessions, and really start to talk to people. I want to hear what you have to say, what you're feeling. So I guess to kind of somewhat wrap up and summarize what I've been thinking, so lots of great personal stories, but one thing that keeps coming back to me is when I think that some of the people that really need to hear this discussion, unfortunately, are not here. So that kind of bothers me a little bit when I get those questions. Well, what are young people so angry about? Don't they understand that this is the final decision of the grand jury and that's just the end of it? Or, well, I was raised to respect police, and so if you respect the cops, then this stuff doesn't happen. And you realize that, well, this is just so far removed from some people's world in the space they grew up in and the things that they've encountered, they just don't quite get it. So I really wish this was a wider group, and we had a large auditorium filled with all kinds of people that we could really talk about this with. So my point, and hopefully what I can do tonight is maybe share some of my thoughts on things. Again, professor of sociology, one of my primary research areas is law enforcement. So I've written a lot about it, published on it. So I have a lot of thoughts, insights in terms of kind of history, reflection on things. So I'm hoping I can share that sort of personally with people tonight and learn from you as you kind of learn from me, hopefully. So with that said, I want to get to the discussion.
I'm Ron Kramer. I'm a professor of sociology and director of our criminal justice program. So we have two majors in our department. You can major in criminal justice or sociology, and we often combine the two. The only thing I would add from a sociological perspective to what's already been said, we know about the importance of history, but I would also like to emphasize the importance of looking at social structures, looking at institutions, looking at systems. Racism exists on several different levels, and one of the most important levels that we have to address is the systemic nature of racism. Racism is built into the institutional social structure of our society. So when we talk about history, we have to see that history unfolding and resulting in racism being part of the broader social system. And so, to some extent, racism can occur without racists. We know there are plenty of racists, but racism can exist without racists because of the way the system operates, because of the institutional structure. So, as we talk about these issues, I think it's important to keep that notion of systemic or institutional racism forefront in our discussion. Thanks.
There's so much more we could say here, but our schedule is such that we need to break out into one of five different rooms so that each of you can engage in conversation with our discussion leaders. So you see the rooms, 1106, 1110. You can see the rooms. So let's do a 5-minute transition period, and then the bell will ring and we'll come over.